The gunshot echoed across the prairie just as Rose Faulkner pressed her pencil to paper, and she watched through her bedroom window as three men rode past her family's farmhouse in a cloud of dust and desperation. She had been working on a new song, one about the way the wheat swayed in the morning breeze, but the violence intruding on her peaceful afternoon made her hands shake. Rose set down her pencil and moved away from the window, her heart pounding. This was Idaho Territory in 1878, and while Challis was growing into a proper mining town, lawlessness still rode alongside prosperity. Her father had warned her about keeping to herself, about not drawing attention, but Rose had never been good at staying quiet when music filled her soul. The farmhouse sat 3 miles outside Challis proper, surrounded by fields her father had cultivated over the past 8 years. Rose was 20 years old now, old enough to have received several marriage proposals from miners and merchants in town, but she had refused them all. Her mother said she was too particular, too caught up in her melodies and verses, but Rose believed that love should feel like the songs she wrote, something that stirred the soul and made the world brighter. She returned to her desk and picked up her pencil again. The song was coming together slowly, each line a careful observation of the land she loved. Rose had been writing songs since she was 14, inspired by the endless sky and the way the seasons transformed the prairie. She sang them while working in the garden, while hanging laundry, while kneading bread in the kitchen. Her mother tolerated it. Her father smiled indulgently, but no one truly understood why she needed to create these melodies. The next morning, Rose walked into town with a basket of eggs to sell at the general store. The main street bustled with activity, miners heading to the claims in the surrounding hills, freight wagons bringing supplies from the bigger cities. She had just completed her transaction when she heard someone humming a familiar tune. Rose turned, searching for the source, but the street was too crowded to identify anyone specific. "Miss Faulkner," the store owner, Mr. Peterson, called out. "There is a new ranch hand staying at the boarding house. He was asking about fresh eggs and vegetables. Said he is working for the Thompson spread." Rose nodded her thanks and stepped outside, adjusting her bonnet against the bright sunshine. The Thompson Ranch was one of the largest cattle operations in the area, sprawling across thousands of acres to the north of Challis. She had met the Thompson family a few times, decent people who treated their workers fairly. As she walked toward the boarding house to inquire about regular deliveries, she heard it again, that humming. This time she stopped and listened carefully. The melody was one of hers, a simple tune she had sung last week while hanging laundry outside. But how could anyone else know it? She never performed publicly, never shared her songs beyond the boundaries of her family's property. The humming came from a man sitting on the boarding house porch, his chair tilted back against the wall, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He appeared to be resting, but the melody continued, soft and almost unconscious. Rose approached slowly, curiosity overcoming her usual shyness around strangers. "Excuse me," she said, and the man's chair came down with a thump. He pushed his hat back, revealing a sun-weathered face and startlingly blue eyes. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a lean build that spoke of hard work and long hours in the saddle. "Yes, madam." His voice carried a hint of Texas drawl, polite and cautious. "That song you were humming," Rose said, her fingers tightening on her basket handle. "Where did you hear it?" He looked puzzled for a moment, then understanding dawned. "I apologize if I was being too loud. I did not mean to disturb anyone. I heard someone singing it a few days ago when I was riding past the farm south of town. It stuck with me, I suppose. Pretty melody." Rose felt her cheeks warm. That was probably me, Those songs, I write them myself." The man stood up, suddenly interested. "You wrote that?" "I have been trying to remember all the words, but I only caught pieces of it. Something about the prairie grass and morning light." "Yes, exactly that." Rose was amazed that he remembered even fragments. Most people barely noticed when she sang. "I compose songs about what I see around me. The land, the seasons, the way things change and stay the same." He extended his hand. "Quinn Sullivan. I just started working for Mr. Thompson. Came up from Texas about 2 weeks ago." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses that marked him as a working cowboy. "Rose Faulkner. My family has the farm 3 miles south, near where you must have heard me." "The place with the big cottonwood tree out front?" Quinn asked. "That is beautiful property. When I rode past, I thought the singing was part of why it seemed so peaceful, like the land itself was making music." No one had ever described her songs that way before. Rose found herself smiling despite her usual reserve around strangers. "Would you like to hear the whole song? I have it written down at home, but I could sing it for you if you are interested." Quinn's face lit up. "I would like that very much, Miss Faulkner. Music has always been important to me. My mother used to sing old ballads from Tennessee, where her family came from. I have not heard much good music since leaving home." They arranged to meet the following Sunday afternoon, when Quinn would have time off from the ranch. Rose returned to the farm feeling lighter than she had in months, as though someone had finally heard her in a way that mattered. She spent the rest of the week refining her songs, writing new verses, and trying to calm her mother's suspicious questions about the cowboy from Texas. When Sunday arrived, Rose wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had helped her sew the previous year. She waited by the cottonwood tree, her journal of songs clutched in her hands, and watched the road for riders. Quinn appeared right on time, his horse a sturdy bay gelding that looked well cared for despite the hard work it must do on the ranch. "Miss Faulkner," he greeted her, dismounting with easy grace. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I have been looking forward to this all week." "Please call me Rose," she said, suddenly nervous now that the moment had arrived. "And I should thank you for wanting to hear my songs. Most people think they are just silly farm girl musings." "Nothing silly about observing the world and finding beauty in it," Quinn said firmly. "That is what good songs do. They help us see what we might otherwise miss." They walked together toward the small creek that ran along the eastern edge of the Faulkner property. The cottonwood provided shade, and the sound of running water created a peaceful backdrop. Rose opened her journal but found she did not need to read the words. She knew these songs by heart. She sang the song Quinn had heard first, about the morning light on prairie grass, how the dew caught the sun and made the whole world sparkle for a few perfect moments before the heat of the day burned it away. Her voice was clear and true, trained only by practice and passion, not by any formal teacher. When she finished, Quinn was quiet for a long moment. "That is remarkable," he finally said. "The way you describe something so simple but make it feel important, like those moments matter." "They do matter," Rose said softly. "All those small moments, they make up our lives. If we do not pay attention to them, what do we have?" Quinn nodded slowly. "Will you sing another one?" Rose sang 6 more songs that afternoon. She sang about winter storms and spring thaws, about the way hawks circled overhead searching for prey, about the endless horizon, and how it made her feel both small and infinite at the same time. Quinn listened to every word, sometimes closing his eyes, sometimes watching her face as she sang. When the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, he stirred as if waking from a dream. "I should get back before full dark," he said reluctantly. "But Rose, would you mind if I visited again? I would very much like to hear more of your songs." "I would like that," Rose admitted. It is different, sharing them with someone who actually wants to listen. I more than want to listen, Quinn said. Your songs, they are making me see this place differently. I came to Idaho because I needed work and heard the ranches were hiring. But listening to you sing about the prairie, I am starting to understand why people put down roots here. You make it come alive. Over the following weeks, Quinn visited the farm every Sunday and sometimes on Wednesday evenings when he could get away from the ranch early. Rose sang her songs, and Quinn listened with an attention that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. He began to hum her melodies while he worked, and the other ranch hands teased him about his constant music making. Where do those tunes come from? One of them asked during a cattle drive. A girl I know writes them, Quinn answered, unable to keep the pride from his voice. She sees the world different than most people. Must be some girl, his friend observed, to put that look on your face. Quinn could not deny it. Rose had become more than just a talented songwriter to him. She was the first thing he thought about when he woke up and the last thing on his mind before sleep. The way she tilted her head when working out a difficult verse, the passion in her voice when she sang about something that moved her, the gentle kindness she showed to every living creature, even the way she laughed when a line did not quite work. All of it had woven itself into his heart. But Quinn was just a cowboy with little to his name beyond his horse, his saddle, and his ability to work hard. Rose deserved someone who could give her security, comfort, a proper home. He tried to keep his feelings to himself, tried to just be grateful for the friendship she offered. Rose, for her part, found Quinn appearing more and more in her songs. She wrote about the way he sat so still while listening, about his blue eyes that reflected the sky, about how his presence made the prairie feel less lonely. She had never expected to fall in love, had certainly never imagined it would happen like this, through shared music and quiet afternoons by the creek. But fall in love she did, so deeply that it frightened her. One evening in late September, as the air grew crisp with the promise of autumn, Quinn arrived at the farm looking troubled. Rose met him at the cottonwood tree as usual, but she could tell immediately that something was wrong. What happened? She asked, concern tightening her chest. Quinn was quiet for a moment, then met her eyes. Mr. Thompson is expanding the operation. He wants to send some of us south to help manage a new property he bought near Boise. He asked me to go. It would mean better pay, maybe even a chance to become a foreman someday. Rose felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Boise was more than 100 miles away. If Quinn left, she might never see him again. When would you go? 2 weeks, Quinn said. Rose, I need to be honest with you about something. I came here today planning to turn down the offer. The money is good, and the opportunity is solid, but the thought of leaving, of not hearing your songs anymore, of not seeing you, I cannot do it. Quinn, Rose whispered, but he continued. I know I am just a cowboy. I do not have land or money or anything to offer you beyond my heart and my willingness to work hard for our future. But Rose, I love you. I have loved you since the first time I heard you singing about the morning light. You have made me understand what home feels like. If I leave, I will lose that, and I cannot bear the thought. Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. You love me. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone, Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. Your songs, they are not just beautiful words and melodies. They are you, the way you see the world, the way you find magic in ordinary things. When I listen to you sing, I feel like I am hearing your soul, and it is the most beautiful thing I have ever encountered. I love you too, Rose said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I have been writing songs about you for weeks. I did not know how to tell you. I did not know if you felt the same way. Quinn, please do not turn down this opportunity because of me. But also, Please do not leave without us figuring out what this means." Quinn stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers. "What do you want it to mean, Rose?" "I want it to mean forever," she said simply. "I want it to mean that we face the future together, wherever that takes us. If the opportunity in Boise is good for us, then maybe that is where we should go. I am not taking you away from your family, from this land you love so much," Quinn protested. "Your songs are rooted here." Rose shook her head. "My songs are rooted in seeing the world with open eyes and an open heart. I can do that anywhere. But Quinn, I can only do it with you now. You have become part of my melody. The thought of singing without you hearing it, that would break something in me." Quinn pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Are you sure? This is a big decision, Rose." "I am more sure of this than I have ever been of anything," she said. "You listen to my songs, truly listen, but more than that, you understand them. You understand me. That is worth more than all the wheat fields in Idaho Territory." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Rose felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was what her songs had been reaching for all along. This connection, this understanding, this love that made the world brighter and more meaningful. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Quinn spoke to Mr. Thompson about the Boise position and asked if he could delay his departure by a month to allow time for a wedding. Mr. Thompson, a romantic at heart despite his gruff exterior, agreed immediately and even offered to host the wedding at his ranch. Rose's parents were surprised by the speed of the courtship, but they could not deny the happiness that radiated from their daughter. "That cowboy makes you glow like sunrise," her father observed. "If he is what you want, then you have my blessing." Her mother was more practical. "Do you love him enough to leave this place, to start over somewhere new?" "I love him enough to start over anywhere," Rose said. "And Mother, I will always carry this place with me. Every song I have written here, every memory, it is all part of who I am, but Quinn is part of who I am becoming. I need both." The wedding took place on a beautiful October afternoon, with the aspen trees turning gold in the surrounding hills and the air crisp and clean. Rose wore a dress her mother had worn at her own wedding, altered to fit Rose's slighter frame. Quinn wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his blue eyes shining with joy. Rose had written a special song for the occasion, one that wove together themes from all her previous compositions. She sang about the prairie and the sky, about finding home in another person, about how love was like the seasons, constantly changing but always returning to its essential nature. Her voice carried across the gathered crowd of ranch hands, town folk and family, and there was not a dry eye when she finished. "That was your finest song yet," Quinn whispered as they stood together after the ceremony. "But I hope you will keep writing. The world needs your music, Rose." "Our music now," she corrected. "You are part of every song I write from this moment forward." They spent their first week of marriage at the Faulkner farm, helping Rose's parents prepare for the coming winter and allowing Rose to say goodbye to the land she had always known. She walked through the wheat fields one last time, stood beneath the cottonwood tree where she had first sung for Quinn, and let herself grieve the ending even as she embraced the beginning. On their last night before departing for Boise, Rose's father pulled Quinn aside. "You take care of my girl. She is special, more special than I think even she understands. Those songs of hers, they are gifts. You make sure the world does not crush that out of her." "I will protect her talent with my life, sir," Quinn promised. "And more than that, I will make sure she knows every day how valuable it is, how valuable she is." The journey to Boise took nearly a week, traveling with a small group of other ranch hands who were also making the move south. Rose rode in a wagon with their belongings. including all her journals of songs and the guitar Quinn had surprised her with as a wedding gift. She had never played an instrument before, but Quinn was teaching her chords in the evenings when they made camp. "Music is more than just voice," he had explained when he gave her the guitar. "This will let you capture your melodies in a new way. Plus, I have always wanted to learn, and I figured we could teach each other." They practiced together on the trail, fumbling through simple tunes and laughing at their mistakes. The other travelers sometimes joined in, adding harmonies or keeping rhythm by tapping on their saddles. Rose found herself writing new songs about the journey, about the way the landscape changed as they traveled south, about the feeling of adventure that came with starting a new life. Boise was larger than Challis, more established and civilized. The ranch where Quinn would work was actually a sprawling cattle operation with multiple properties and a sophisticated organizational structure. Mr. Garrett, the man who owned the outfit, was impressed by Quinn's experience and work ethic. He offered them a small house on the property, a two-room cabin that was simple but sturdy. "It is not much," Mr. Garrett said as he showed them the place, "but it is yours for as long as you work for me. My wife might have some furniture to spare, and we can probably fix it up nice." Rose loved it immediately. The cabin had a window facing east, perfect for morning light, and a small porch where she could sit and write. There was room for a garden come spring, and the outhouse was relatively close. Most importantly, it was theirs, a place to build a life together. She threw herself into making the cabin a home, sewing curtains from fabric she bought in town, arranging their few possessions to maximize the limited space, and cooking meals on the small stove that came with the place. Quinn worked long hours learning the new operation, but he always came home eager to hear what Rose had done during the day and what songs she had written. "I started one about sagebrush," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It is different from the prairie grass back home, but there is beauty in it. The way it survives with so little water, the way it smells after rain." "Sing it for me," Quinn requested, settling back against the porch rail. Rose sang, her voice carrying across the darkening land. Other families lived scattered around the ranch property, and sometimes she saw people stop their work to listen when she sang. It made her self-conscious at first, but Quinn encouraged her to share her music more openly. "You have a gift, Rose. It is meant to be shared, not hidden away." Encouraged by his support, Rose began to sing at the small church in town on Sundays. Her songs were different from traditional hymns, but the congregation responded enthusiastically to her prairie melodies and honest lyrics. The pastor asked her to write a special song for Christmas, and she created something that wove together the traditional story with observations about winter landscapes and the way hope persisted even in the coldest darkness. Quinn attended every performance, sitting in the back pew with his hat in his hands, his face glowing with pride. After the Christmas service, several people approached Rose asking for copies of her songs. She had never considered that people might want to own her music, might want to sing her melodies themselves. "You should write them down proper," Quinn suggested. "Make a collection. There is a print shop in town. Maybe they could help you create something people could buy." The idea terrified and thrilled Rose in equal measure. Her songs had always been private, personal expressions of her inner world. But sharing them with Quinn had taught her that music could create connections, could help people feel less alone. If her songs could do that for more people, was it not worth the vulnerability? She spent the winter compiling her best songs, organizing them by theme and season, writing out both the lyrics and the melodies as best she could notate them. Quinn helped in the evenings, humming the tunes while she checked her notation, offering suggestions on how to explain the rhythms and phrasing. The work brought them even closer together, their partnership extending beyond marriage into creative collaboration. In March, as the first signs of spring began to appear, Rose approached the print shop with her completed manuscript. The owner, a scholarly man named Mr. Davies, looked through the pages with growing interest. "This is quite unique," he said. "I have published plenty of traditional ballads and popular songs, but nothing like this. These are genuinely original compositions, and the lyrics are remarkably evocative. Where did you learn to write like this?" "I did not learn," Rose admitted. "I just write what I see and feel." Mr. Davies nodded thoughtfully. "That authenticity shows. Miss Sullivan, I would be honored to print your collection. I cannot promise it will sell widely, but I believe there is an audience for honest music about the Western experience. Give me 2 months, and I will have copies ready for you." Rose left the shop in a daze, hardly believing what had just happened. When she told Quinn that night, he swept her into his arms and spun her around their small cabin, both of them laughing with joy. "I knew it," he said. "I knew from the first time I heard you sing that your music was special. Rose, you are going to touch so many lives with these songs. Only because you believed in them first," she said. "Quinn, if you had not stopped to listen that day, if you had not asked to hear more, I might never have had the courage to share them beyond our farm. Then I am grateful every day that I rode past your place at just the right moment," Quinn said softly. "You have given my life melody, Rose. You have taught me to see beauty I would have missed otherwise." True to his word, Mr. Davies had the song collection ready by May. The slim volume contained 30 of Rose's songs, each one a small window into her soul. They titled it Prairie Melodies at Quinn's suggestion, and Rose signed her name on the first page with a shaking hand. Mr. Davies printed 200 copies, a number that seemed impossibly large to Rose. The books sold faster than anyone expected. People who had heard Rose sing at church bought copies, and they shared them with friends and family. Travelers passing through Boise picked up copies to take to other towns. Within 3 months, Mr. Davies was printing another run. Within 6 months, Rose was receiving letters from people across Idaho Territory and beyond, telling her how her songs had moved them, had reminded them of their own experiences on the frontier. One letter came from an elderly woman in Oregon who wrote that Rose's song about autumn harvest had made her cry, reminding her of her late husband and the farm they had built together. A young man in Montana wrote that he sang Rose's songs to his infant daughter, and they helped soothe her to sleep. A miner in Nevada said her melody about mountain sunrises had become a favorite among his crew, something they sang to keep spirits up during hard work. "Your songs are traveling farther than we ever could," Quinn observed as Rose read through another batch of letters. "They are out there in the world, making people feel connected to this land and to each other." Rose was overwhelmed by the response. She had never imagined her private observations would resonate with so many people. The modest royalties from the book sales provided extra income that allowed them to save money and improve their cabin. But more valuable than the money was the knowledge that her music mattered, that it served a purpose beyond her own need to create. As her first year of marriage came to a close, Rose discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had always wanted children, but she worried about how motherhood would affect her songwriting. Would she have time to create? Would the exhaustion and responsibility crowd out her music? Quinn sensed her anxiety. "Rose, being a mother will give you new things to write about, new perspectives, new emotions. Your music will change, but it will not disappear. It is too much a part of who you are." He was right. As her body changed and she prepared for motherhood, Rose found herself writing different kinds of songs. She wrote about the anticipation of meeting someone you already loved, about the way life persisted and renewed itself, about the courage it took to bring a new person into an uncertain world. These songs had a different quality than her Prairie observations, deeper and more introspective, but no less true. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1880, arriving with a powerful cry that echoed through the cabin. They named him Thomas, after Quinn's father, and from the moment Rose held him, she understood that her capacity for love had expanded in ways she never imagined possible. Thomas had Quinn's blue eyes and Rose's dark hair, and he was perfect. The first months of motherhood were as exhausting as Rose had feared, but also more rewarding. She sang to Thomas constantly, her lullabies drawn from her collected songs and new compositions inspired by the miracle of his existence. Quinn was a devoted father, taking the baby for long walks when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and singing off key versions of Rose's songs that made her laugh despite her exhaustion. "He likes music," Quinn observed when Thomas was 3 months old. "Watch his face when you sing. He is listening, really listening." Rose saw it too. Thomas would grow still and focused when she sang, his infant eyes trying to track her face, his tiny hands opening and closing as if reaching for the melody. She began to write songs specifically for him, simple verses about the world he was discovering, about birds and sunshine, and the love his parents had for him. When Thomas was 6 months old, Mr. Davies approached Rose about a second collection. "Your first book continues to sell steadily. People are writing to ask if you have more songs. I know you have been busy with the baby, but if you have new material, I believe there is definitely a market for it." Rose did have new material, dozens of songs written during her pregnancy and the early months of motherhood. These songs were more intimate than her first collection, less about the external landscape and more about the internal terrain of the heart. She was not sure people would want them, but Quinn encouraged her to trust her instincts. "Your music has always been honest," he said. "That is why people love it. These new songs are just as honest, just in a different way." The second collection, titled Heart of the West, was published in late 1880 and sold even better than the first. Readers responded powerfully to Rose's explorations of love, family, and the ways people built lives in challenging circumstances. Several songs became particularly popular, sung in homes and churches across the Western Territories. Rose's growing success as a songwriter brought unexpected attention. A journalist from San Francisco visited Boise to interview her, fascinated by the idea of a frontier farm girl turned published songwriter. The article that resulted was flattering but strange, portraying Rose as a kind of frontier curiosity rather than a serious artist. She struggled with this new public dimension of her private work. "I just write songs," she told Quinn after the article was published. "I am not trying to be anything more than that. But this writer made it sound like I am some kind of phenomenon, as if regular people cannot create art." "You are a phenomenon," Quinn said with a smile, "but not because you are unusual. You are a phenomenon because you pay attention and you share what you see. That is rare, Rose. Most people move through life without really looking at it. You look, and then you help others see too." His words comforted her, reminding her why she wrote songs in the first place. It was never about fame or recognition. It was about capturing the beauty and meaning she found in everyday life, about creating something that might help others feel less alone. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler, Rose found ways to balance motherhood with her creative work. She wrote songs during his nap times, tested melodies while playing with him in the garden, and included him in her process. By the time he was 2 years old, Thomas could hum several of his mother's songs and would request favorites at bedtime. Quinn continued to work hard at the ranch, but he had been promoted to foreman, which meant better pay and more respect. He used part of his increased wages to buy Rose a better guitar, one that stayed in tune more reliably and had a richer tone. He had also learned to play basic chords himself, and they sometimes performed simple duets in the evenings, their voices blending while Thomas clapped along. "I never thought life could be this good," Quinn confessed one night after Thomas had fallen asleep. "When I left Texas, I was just trying to survive, to find work and make something of myself. But Rose, you have given me so much more than that. You have given me purpose and beauty and a family. You have taught me that life is not just about surviving. It is about paying attention to the moments that make survival worthwhile." "You did the same for me," Rose said, leaning against his shoulder. "Before you, my songs were just something I did for myself. You showed me they could be more, that they could connect me to other people. You gave my music meaning beyond my own need to create." They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from deep understanding and shared purpose. Outside, the Idaho night was filled with stars, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Rose made a mental note of the sound, already imagining how she might incorporate it into a song. In 1882, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. Where Thomas had been loud and demanding from birth, Sarah was quiet and observant, seeming to absorb the world around her with calm attention. Rose saw something of herself in Sarah's watchful nature and wondered if her daughter might also grow up to be a creator of some kind. The cabin was growing crowded with 4 people, and Quinn began to make plans for an addition. Mr. Garrett agreed to provide materials if Quinn did the labor himself, and several other ranch hands volunteered to help. Over the course of that summer, they added 2 more rooms to the cabin, giving Thomas and Sarah their own small bedroom and providing Rose with a dedicated space for her writing. "A proper studio for a proper artist," Quinn announced when the addition was finished. He had built her a desk that faced the new window, with shelves for her journals and her growing collection of musical instruments. Rose stood in the space, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "This is too much," she protested, but Quinn shook his head. "It is exactly right. Rose, your music has given us so much. It has provided extra income, but more than that, it has enriched our lives and the lives of everyone who hears your songs. You deserve a space where you can work properly." Rose used the studio constantly, writing more prolifically than ever before. She was working on her 3rd collection. This one focused on the cycle of seasons, and the way time moved differently in the West than it had in the more settled East. She had never lived in the East herself, but letters from readers often mentioned the difference, how the vastness of the Western landscape changed people's relationship with time and space. By 1884, Rose had published 4 collections of songs, and her music was known throughout the Western Territories. She had developed a modest following of people who eagerly awaited each new volume. A music professor from San Francisco wrote to say he was using her songs to teach students about American folk music composition. A theatrical company in Denver inquired about using some of her songs in a production about frontier life. Despite this growing recognition, Rose remained grounded in her daily life. She still tended her garden, still cooked meals for her family, still hung laundry and swept floors. She sang to her children, taught them about the prairie plants and animals, and wrote songs that captured the ordinary magic of their lives together. Fame, such as it was, had not changed who she was at her core. Quinn, watching his wife navigate her success with grace and humility, fell more in love with her every year. She had given him a family, a home, and a deeper appreciation for the world around him. Because of Rose, he noticed things he would have missed before, the particular call of a meadowlark, the way evening light transformed the sagebrush, the infinite variations of blue in the western sky. "You made me a better man," he told her on their 6th wedding anniversary. "Not just a better husband or father, though you did that too. But Rose, you made me see that life is about more than just working and surviving. It is about finding meaning in small moments, about creating beauty where you can. I was just going through the motions before I met you. Now I am actually living." Rose squeezed his hand, too moved to speak for a moment. "We made each other better," she finally said. "You gave me the courage to share my music. You believed in it before anyone else did. That belief, it changed everything for me." In the spring of 1885, Rose received an unexpected letter. A publisher in New York had heard about her Western songs and wanted to discuss a national distribution deal for her collections. The offer was generous, more money than Rose and Quinn had ever imagined, along with promises of broader exposure and professional musical arrangements of her melodies. "We could buy our own land," Quinn said, his mind racing with possibilities. "Build a real house, maybe start our own small ranch. Rose, this could change our lives." But Rose was hesitant. She had watched how her modest success had complicated her relationship with her work. How would real fame affect her ability to write honestly? Would the pressure of commercial expectations stifle her creativity? "I need to think about it," she told Quinn. "This is not just about money or opportunity. My songs come from a particular way of seeing the world. I do not want to lose that in pursuit of wider recognition." They discussed it for weeks, weighing the opportunities against the potential costs. Rose wrote to several of her regular correspondents, asking their advice. She also spent long hours in her studio, trying to understand what she really wanted from her music and her life. Finally, she reached a decision. She would accept the New York publisher's offer, but with specific conditions. She would maintain creative control over her songs. No one could change her lyrics or melodies without her approval. She would continue to live in Idaho, drawing inspiration from the landscape she knew. And she would publish at her own pace, writing when inspiration struck rather than forcing material to meet deadlines. To Rose's surprise, the publisher agreed to all her terms. Her songs, it seemed, were valuable enough that she could dictate conditions. The first nationally distributed collection appeared in late 1885, beautifully bound with illustrations of Western landscapes. It sold better than even the optimistic publisher had expected, finding audiences far beyond the frontier territories. Letters poured in from across the country. A woman in Boston wrote that Rose's songs made her understand why her son had moved west, what he was seeking in those wide open spaces. A farmer in Ohio said the songs reminded him of his youth, before cities and railroads had tamed the landscape. A young girl in Philadelphia wrote that she wanted to be a songwriter like Rose when she grew up, creating music about her own experiences and observations. The financial success from the national publication allowed Quinn to buy a substantial piece of land near Boise. 200 acres with a creek running through it and good grass for cattle. They built a proper house, larger than the cabin but still modest by most standards, designed around Rose's needs as much as practical considerations. Her studio was twice the size of the one Quinn had built onto the cabin, with windows on 2 sides and excellent light. Thomas, now 6 years old, started school in Boise. Sarah, at 3, spent her days following Rose around the new property, asking endless questions about everything she saw. Rose found herself writing songs about parenthood, about the way children discovered the world fresh and new, about the particular joy and terror of watching your children grow and change. Quinn managed their small cattle operation with the same attention and care he had given to his work as a ranch hand. He hired 2 young cowboys to help with the daily work, which gave him more time to spend with Rose and the children. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Quinn and Rose would sit on their porch, and she would share whatever new song she was working on. His feedback was always thoughtful, always focused on helping her express what she was truly trying to say. "This line about the creek," he said one night, "it is good, but I think you can go deeper. You are not just describing the water. You are talking about how things persist, how they keep flowing no matter what obstacles they encounter. Maybe make that clearer." Rose revised the line, then sang it again. Quinn nodded with satisfaction. "That is it. That is what you meant." Their partnership had evolved into something rare and precious, a true meeting of minds and hearts. They challenged each other, supported each other, and created space for each other to grow. Rose's music continued to evolve, becoming more complex and nuanced with each collection. Quinn's understanding of the land deepened, informed by Rose's careful observations and poetic expressions. In 1887, Rose gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Daniel. The birth was harder than the previous 2, and Rose needed several months to fully recover. During that time, she could not write much, and she worried that she was losing her creative edge. But Quinn took over many of the household duties and made sure she had time to rest and heal properly. "The songs will come back," he assured her. "Your talent did not disappear just because you need time to recover. Be patient with yourself." He was right. By the time Daniel was 6 months old, Rose was writing again, this time with a new awareness of fragility and mortality that added depth to her work. Her 6th collection, published in 1888, included several songs that dealt with the precariousness of life on the frontier, the way illness and accident and simple bad luck could upend everything. These songs resonated powerfully with readers who had experienced similar losses and fears. As the decade came to a close, Rose and Quinn's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Their ranch was small but successful. Their children were healthy and thriving, showing various combinations of their parents' traits. Thomas loved music but was more interested in performing than composing. Sarah was already writing her own simple verses, encouraged by Rose but developing her own voice. Daniel was still too young to show clear interests, but he loved being outside, watching the cattle and horses with fascinated attention. Rose had published 8 collections by 1890, each one selling well and finding new audiences. She was considered one of the foremost voices capturing the Western experience through music, though she still thought of herself primarily as a farm wife who wrote songs. The disconnect between her public reputation and her private self-image sometimes amused Quinn. "You are famous," he told her after she had shrugged off yet another laudatory review. "People across the country know your name and sing your songs. When are you going to accept that you are a legitimate artist?" "I accept that I write songs people like," Rose said. "But Quinn, I am still just observing the world and writing down what I see. That is not really different from what I was doing when I was 20 and living on my parents' farm." "The audience changed, not the work." "The work changed too," Quinn countered. "You have grown as an artist. These latest songs, they are more sophisticated than your early ones, not better necessarily, but different, deeper. You have evolved." Rose considered this. He was probably right. The girl who had written simple observations about prairie grass had become a woman who wrote about love, loss, parenthood, mortality, and the complex ways people related to the land and to each other. Her technical skill had improved through practice. Her emotional range had expanded through experience. She was not the same songwriter she had been at 20, even if the fundamental impulse remained the same. In 1892, Rose received an invitation that surprised her. A women's college in Massachusetts wanted her to come speak about her work, to share her creative process with young women interested in the arts. The invitation included travel expenses for her entire family and a generous speaking fee. It would mean being away from the ranch for several weeks, but Quinn encouraged her to accept. "This is important," he said. "Those young women need to hear from someone like you, someone who has built a creative life on her own terms. You can show them it is possible to be an artist and a wife and a mother all at once." Rose was nervous about public speaking, but she agreed to go. In October, the Sullivan family boarded a train heading east, beginning a journey that would take them farther from Idaho than Rose had ever traveled. Thomas, now 12, was excited about seeing new places. Sarah, 9 years old, brought a journal to document the trip. Daniel, at 5, was mostly interested in the trains themselves. The journey took days, passing through landscapes Rose had only read about. She made notes constantly, observing how the western mountains gave way to plains, how the plains eventually became rolling farmland, how the farmland transformed into increasingly dense settlements. Each region had its own character, its own beauty, and Rose found herself writing songs about the diversity of the American landscape. The college campus was beautiful, old brick buildings covered in ivy, surrounded by trees showing their autumn colors. The students who gathered to hear Rose speak were eager and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about her creative process, her inspirations, and how she managed to balance art with family responsibilities. "I do not always balance it well," Rose admitted. "Sometimes the songs demand all my attention, and the laundry does not get done. Sometimes the children need me, and the songs have to wait. But I have learned that both the songs and the family are better when I do not try to separate them completely. My children inspire my music. My music makes me a better mother because it helps me stay connected to wonder and beauty." The young women responded enthusiastically, and several approached Rose afterward to share their own creative aspirations. One girl showed Rose poems she had written about her childhood in Maine. Another was composing music for piano and wanted advice on how to develop her own voice. Rose spent hours talking with these young artists, encouraging them to trust their unique perspectives and to create from authentic experience rather than trying to imitate established forms. Quinn watched these interactions with pride. His wife was not just a talented songwriter. She was a teacher, a mentor, someone who could help others find their own creative paths. He had always known she was special, but seeing her in this context, sharing her wisdom with the next generation, reinforced just how remarkable she truly was. The family's time in Massachusetts was enriching but also exhausting. By the time they returned to Idaho in late November, everyone was ready to be home. Rose, in particular, felt a deep relief at seeing their land again, at returning to the landscape that fueled her creativity. "I enjoyed the trip," she told Quinn as they stood on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "But I do not think I could live anywhere else. This place, it is in my bones now. My songs come from this specific earth, this particular sky. I need to be here to create." "Then we will stay here," Quinn said simply. "This is our home. This is where we built our life together, Nothing is going to change that. The 1890s brought continued success and stability. Rose published 2 more collections, bringing her total to 10 books of songs spanning the full range of Western experience. A symphony in Chicago adapted several of her melodies into a longer orchestral work celebrating American frontier life. A poet in New York published a book of verses inspired by Rose's songs. Her influence extended far beyond her own publications, rippling out through American culture in ways she never fully realized. Thomas, as he grew into a teenager, showed talent as a musician, but chose to focus on instrumental performance rather than composition. He learned fiddle from one of the ranch hands and piano from a teacher in Boise, developing into a skilled player who could interpret his mother's songs with sensitivity and flair. Rose loved hearing her melodies through his interpretation, seeing how he brought his own understanding to her work. Sarah, meanwhile, was definitely following in her mother's creative footsteps. By age 12, she was writing poems and songs constantly, filling journal after journal with observations and ideas. Her style was different from Rose's, more abstract and imagistic, but the fundamental impulse was the same. Rose gave her daughter space to develop her own voice while offering guidance when asked. Daniel, the youngest, was more interested in the ranch than in music or writing. He loved working with the cattle, loved riding across their land checking fences and water sources. Quinn saw himself in Daniel and spent hours teaching his youngest son about animal husbandry, weather prediction, and land management. Rose captured these father-son moments in several songs about how knowledge passed between generations. By 1898, Rose was 40 years old, and she and Quinn had been married for 20 years. 2 decades of partnership, of building a life together, of raising children and creating art and managing a ranch. They decided to celebrate with a party, inviting friends and neighbors from throughout the region. The celebration took place on a beautiful September afternoon, with long tables of food set up in the yard and a makeshift stage where Thomas could play his fiddle and Rose could sing. As the sun began to set, Rose stood on the stage with her family around her and sang a new song she had written specifically for the occasion. It was a song about time, about how 20 years could feel like both forever and an instant, about how love deepened and changed and remained constant all at once. She sang about the cottonwood tree where she and Quinn had first shared her music, about the cabin they had made into a home, about children growing and seasons turning, and the endless renewal of prairie life. Her voice was still strong and true, perhaps even richer than it had been at 20, carrying the weight of experience and the depth of lived love. When she finished, there was a moment of perfect silence, and then applause erupted across the gathering. But Rose was only looking at Quinn, at the tears streaming down his face, at the love shining in his blue eyes. "That was for you," she said quietly, stepping off the stage to embrace him. "Everything I sing, every song I write, it is all ultimately for you. You taught me that my music could matter, could connect me to the world. But more than that, you loved me in a way that made me brave enough to share it." "You were always brave," Quinn said, holding her close. "I just recognized it." "Rose, these 20 years, they have been the greatest gift of my life. You are the greatest gift of my life. Your songs, our children, this home we built together, all of it stems from that first afternoon when you sang to me by the creek. That was the day my real life began." They held each other as the party continued around them, as Thomas played a lively tune on his fiddle, as Sarah laughed with friends, as Daniel chased other children across the yard. This was what Rose had been singing about all along, the way small moments accumulated into a meaningful life, the way love and attention transformed the ordinary into something precious. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. On New Year's Day 1900, Rose and Quinn stood with their children watching the sunrise, welcoming not just a new year but a new era. So much had changed since Rose had first started writing songs about the prairie 20 years earlier. Idaho was a state now, admitted to the Union in 1890. Challis had grown from a rough mining town into an established community. The frontier was closing, the wild spaces shrinking as railroads and telegraph lines connected the West more fully to the rest of the nation. But some things remained constant. The sky was still endless. The mountains still dominated the horizon. The creek on their property still flowed year-round, providing water for cattle and music for Rose's soul. The land persisted beneath all the changes humans imposed upon it. Rose continued to write, though she slowed her publication schedule. She no longer needed to prove herself as a songwriter, no longer felt pressure to constantly produce new material. Instead, she wrote when inspiration struck, when she encountered something that demanded to be captured in melody and verse. Her 11th collection, published in 1903, reflected this more relaxed approach, containing just 15 songs but each one polished to perfection. Thomas left home in 1901 to study music at a conservatory in Denver. Sarah remained at home, helping with the ranch while developing her own writing career. Her first book of poems was published in 1904, and reviewers noted the influence of her mother while acknowledging Sarah's distinct voice and vision. Daniel showed no interest in leaving, content to work the land alongside his father and gradually take over more responsibility for the ranch. As Rose moved through her 40s, she found herself writing more reflective songs, pieces that looked back on her life with gratitude and forward to an uncertain future with acceptance. She wrote about aging, about watching children become adults, about the way the landscape held memories of all the years she had lived upon it. These songs had a bittersweet quality that resonated with readers who were also navigating the passage of time. Quinn aged too, his dark hair turning silver, his face gaining more lines, his body bearing the accumulated wear of decades of hard physical labor. But his blue eyes remained sharp, his love for Rose as strong as ever. They still sat together on the porch most evenings, still shared new songs and thoughts and observations. Their partnership had only deepened with time, becoming something so integrated that neither could imagine life without the other. In 1908, Rose's parents both passed away within months of each other. She traveled to Challis for the funerals, grieving the loss but also grateful for the time she had been given with them. Standing at their graves, she remembered singing while hanging laundry at their farm, remembered her father's indulgent smile and her mother's practical concerns. They had given her roots, had raised her with enough freedom to develop her talents, had eventually supported her marriage to a cowboy with more love than money. She wrote a song about them, about what parents give their children beyond material things, about how the dead persist in memory and influence. It was one of her most personal compositions, and she almost did not publish it. But Quinn convinced her that the song's intimate honesty was exactly what made it valuable. People need to know that even someone who seems to have it all figured out still grieves and struggles, he said. Your willingness to share your pain, it helps others feel less alone in theirs. Thomas returned from Denver in 1910, having completed his studies and gained experience performing with various musical ensembles. He announced his intention to stay in Idaho to make a living as a musician and teacher in Boise. He had met a young woman, a pianist named Catherine, and they were planning to marry in the fall. Rose welcomed Catherine warmly, seeing in her a kindred creative spirit. Sarah surprised everyone by falling in love with one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Robert, who shared her love of the land and her artistic temperament. They married in 1911 in a simple ceremony on the ranch, and Sarah continued to write while helping her husband and father manage the cattle operation. She published her second book of poems in 1912. This one focused on marriage and partnership in a way that made Rose smile at the parallels to her own experience. Daniel, at 23, showed no interest in marriage yet, though he had suitors. He was focused on the ranch, on building up their herd and improving their grazing lands. Quinn taught him everything he knew, and Daniel proved to be a natural cattleman with good instincts and strong work ethic. By 1915, Rose was 57 years old, and she had published 13 collections of songs spanning 35 years of creative work. A musicologist at the University of California was writing a book about her contributions to American folk music. Several of her songs had entered the common repertoire, sung by people who did not even know who had written them originally. Her legacy was secure, though she still did not quite think of herself as having a legacy. "I just wrote songs," she said when Quinn mentioned the musicologist's book. "I paid attention to what was around me and tried to capture it in melody. That is all." "That is everything," Quinn countered. "Rose, you changed how people think about Western life. Your songs showed that the frontier was not just about adventure and violence. It was also about beauty and meaning and the daily work of building a life. You gave voice to experiences that would have otherwise been lost." Rose supposed he was right, though she still felt uncomfortable with grand assessments of her work. She preferred to focus on the next song, the next observation waiting to be transformed into art. As long as she could still see beauty in the world around her, she would continue to write. In 1918, the Great War finally ended, and Thomas came home from service in France where he had played in a military band. He was changed by the experience, quieter and more serious, but gradually the music helped him heal. He and Catherine had 2 children now, giving Rose her first grandchildren. Watching Thomas with his daughters, teaching them simple melodies and encouraging their musical exploration, Rose saw the cycle continuing, saw her influence rippling forward into the future. The 1920s brought changes to American life that felt disorienting to Rose. The country seemed to be speeding up, becoming more urban and modern. Jazz was replacing traditional folk music in popularity. The radio brought distant voices into homes, making the world feel both larger and smaller simultaneously. Rose worried that her Prairie songs were becoming obsolete, relics of a simpler time that no longer existed, but her fears proved unfounded. If anything, the rapid modernization made people more nostalgic for the music she created. Her songs reminded listeners of a connection to land and nature that many felt they were losing. A new generation discovered her work, drawn to the authenticity and careful observation that had always characterized her compositions. In 1925, Rose published what she thought would be her final collection. She was 67 years old, and the songs felt like a summation of everything she had learned about life, love, and the Western landscape. The collection traced a circle from youth through maturity to old age, acknowledging both loss and continuing wonder. The final song ended with the image of a meadowlark singing at dawn, its voice carrying across the prairie unchanged by human time, a constant reminder of beauty and renewal. Critics praised the collection as her finest work, noting how a lifetime of careful observation and technical skill had combined to produce songs of remarkable depth and power. But for Rose, the satisfaction came not from critical acclaim, but from knowing she had said what she needed to say, had captured what she had seen, had been faithful to her original impulse to pay attention and share. Quinn was 70 now, his body finally slowing down after decades of hard physical labor. He turned over most of the ranch management to Daniel, but still insisted on riding out to check on things every day. Rose worried about him, about his health and safety, but she also understood his need to remain connected to the land they had built their life upon. On a morning in August 1927, Quinn did not wake up. He had died in his sleep, peacefully, with Rose beside him as she had been for 49 years. Rose held his hand and wept, feeling as though part of her own soul had been torn away. They had planned to celebrate their 50th anniversary the following October. Instead, she was planning his funeral. The service was held at the ranch, with hundreds of people attending to pay their respects. Thomas played his fiddle, Sarah read a poem, Daniel spoke about what his father had taught him. But Rose could not sing. For the first time in her life, music failed her. The grief was too raw, too total. The melody of her life had been silenced, and she did not know how to continue alone. For months, Rose could not write. She tried, filling pages with false starts and abandoned verses, but nothing felt true. The songs that came were forced and hollow, lacking the vitality that had always characterized her work. She began to think that maybe her creativity had been dependent on Quinn's presence, on having him as her first audience and most trusted critic. Without him, perhaps she had nothing left to say. Sarah and Catherine took turns staying with her, making sure she ate and slept and did not sink too deeply into grief. Thomas visited weekly, playing music and trying to draw his mother out of her despair. Daniel moved into the main house, insisting that Rose should not be alone. They all meant well, but their presence only emphasized Quinn's absence. Spring came, as it always did, transforming the brown prairie into green abundance. Rose forced herself to walk through the land, retracing routes she and Quinn had traveled together thousands of times. She stood by the creek where she had first sung for him 50 years earlier. She visited the spot where their cabin had stood before they built the larger house. She went to the small cemetery on the property where Quinn was buried, sitting beside his grave and talking to him about everything and nothing. Slowly, gradually, the songs began to return. They were different now, tinged with loss and longing, but they were real. Rose wrote about grief, about how love persisted beyond death, about the way memories lived in landscape. She wrote about the cottonwood tree and the blue-eyed cowboy who had listened to her songs so long ago. She wrote about 50 years of partnership, of shared dreams and daily cooperation, of building something meaningful together. By autumn, she had enough new songs for a collection. She was not sure she wanted to publish them, these intimate expressions of her sorrow, but Sarah convinced her that they needed to be shared. "People need to hear how you are surviving this," Sarah said. "They need to know that grief does not destroy creativity, that art can help us process loss." "Mother, these songs are some of your most powerful work. They need to exist in the world." Rose published the collection in 1928, titling it Remembering the Melody. It was her 14th and final book, a farewell to Quinn and to her long career as a songwriter. The response was overwhelming, with readers across the country writing to share their own stories of loss and survival. Rose's honest exploration of grief gave others permission to mourn fully, to acknowledge how death transformed but did not end love. The final years of Rose's life were quieter but not unhappy. She found joy in her grandchildren, in watching Thomas's daughters become musicians and Sarah's son develop into a fine writer. She took pleasure in the ranch's continued success under Daniel's management. She still wrote songs occasionally, brief pieces that captured fleeting observations or emotions, but she no longer felt driven to publish or perform. On a September morning in 1932, Rose sat on her porch watching the sunrise, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the autumn chill. She was 74 years old, and her body was failing, but her mind remained sharp and her spirit intact. She thought about the girl she had been, writing songs about prairie grass and morning light, never imagining where that simple impulse would lead. She thought about Quinn, about the day he had stopped to listen, about how that moment had changed everything. The meadowlark began to sing, its voice clear and true in the dawn quiet. Rose closed her eyes and listened, really listened, paying attention the way she had taught herself to do so many decades earlier. The song was beautiful, a perfect expression of the land's persistent wildness. She hummed along softly, adding her own voice to the bird's melody, becoming part of the music one last time. Thomas found her there an hour later, still sitting peacefully in her chair, the blanket tucked around her, a small smile on her face. She had died as she had lived, paying attention to beauty, participating in the world's music. The funeral was held at the ranch, just as Quinn's had been. Rose was buried beside him under the cottonwood tree that had witnessed the beginning of their love. Hundreds of people attended, including several who had traveled from as far as New York and California. They sang Rose's songs throughout the service, their voices carrying across the prairie she had spent her life observing and celebrating. After the burial, after the guests had departed and the family had gathered in the house, Thomas found a letter Rose had left for him. In her careful handwriting, she had written instructions for one final gift. She wanted her 14 books of songs to remain in print, with royalties supporting music education for young people in rural areas. She wanted students who lived on farms and ranches, who might feel isolated or overlooked, to have access to instruments and lessons and encouragement. Let them know their experiences matter, she had written. Let them know that paying attention to the world around them is valuable, that their observations can become art. Let them know what Quinn taught me, that beauty exists everywhere, and it is worth capturing and sharing. Thomas worked with Rose's publisher to establish the Rose Faulkner Sullivan Foundation, dedicated to supporting young rural musicians and songwriters. Sarah contributed her mother's journals and letters to establish an archive at the State University, preserving Rose's creative process and personal history for future study. Daniel continued to manage the ranch, keeping the land Rose had loved in the family. Years passed, then decades. Rose's songs remained popular, covered by successive generations of musicians, and studied by scholars of American music. The foundation she had endowed provided instruments and education to thousands of rural students, many of whom went on to create their own music, inspired by Rose's example of careful observation and honest expression. The ranch stayed in the family, passed from Daniel to his children and eventually to their children. The cottonwood tree where Rose and Quinn were buried grew larger and stronger, its roots deep in the Idaho soil, its branches reaching toward the endless sky. Visitors sometimes came to pay their respects, to stand in the place where those remarkable songs had been created, to imagine the young farm girl singing to a cowboy who stopped to listen. Rose's greatest legacy was not fame or critical recognition, though she had earned both. It was the simple but profound truth she had lived and expressed through her music, that paying attention matters, that beauty exists in ordinary moments, that love transforms and deepens life. She had written songs about the prairie, and through those songs, She had helped countless people see their own lives more clearly, had reminded them to listen to the world's melodies and add their voices to the ongoing song. Quinn had listened and became the melody she sang, but in truth, they had created something together that was larger than either of them alone. Their love story, played out across 50 years on the Idaho Prairie, had become its own kind of song, one that continued to echo long after the singers had fallen silent. It was a song about partnership and creativity, about building a meaningful life in a challenging place, about how two people paying attention together could create something beautiful and lasting. The meadowlarks still sang at dawn over the ranch, their voices unchanged by the passage of time. The creek still flowed, providing water and music. The sky still stretched endlessly overhead, holding all the colors Rose had spent her life trying to capture in words and melody. The land persisted, and with it, the memory of the farm girl who had seen its beauty and the cowboy who had helped her share it with the world.